On the distant planet of Zarathar, the air was thick with the smell of sulfur, and the heat from the ground made the sky shimmer. Towering volcanoes dotted the landscape, and strange glowing plants spread across the rocky plains. It was a world unlike any other, teeming with life forms that humans had only heard about in legends. Among the research team sent to explore Zarathar was a little girl named Lila, just 6 years old. Though she was small, she was full of energy and curiosity. Lila had a unique gift, a deep understanding of animals. She had always been drawn to creatures, big or small, dangerous or harmless. Her parents, both scientists, were often busy working, but they trusted her instincts around the alien wildlife. To them, it seemed impossible that a child so young could navigate the strange and often dangerous world of Zarathar. But Lila never thought twice about it. It was on a bright, cloudless morning when Lila wandered too far from the camp. Her parents had warned her to stay close, but she was too excited. She had learned of a creature that few had seen and even fewer had survived encounters with. A dragon hatchling. According to the reports, dragons were huge, fiery creatures that roamed the planet's volcanic regions. They were fierce and not to be approached. But to Lila, they sounded fascinating. Lila had a way of seeing the world differently. While the adults saw the dragons as nothing but a danger, Lila saw a mystery waiting to be solved, a creature needing to be understood. Her small legs carried her quickly across the uneven ground, her wide eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the elusive dragon. It was then that she saw it. In the distance, hidden beneath the shadow of a jagged rock formation, something large moved. Lila's heart raced with excitement. She crept closer, crouching low behind a boulder to stay out of sight. The creature was a dragon hatchling, no bigger than a large horse, but its scales were the color of molten lava, glowing with an eerie orange light. Its wings were folded, and its eyes burned like two bright embers. The hatchling was pacing back and forth, seemingly restless, its tail flicking angrily behind it. Lila's first instinct was to turn and run, but something held her back. She had seen many creatures on this planet, some terrifying, others gentle, but this dragon was different. There was a sadness in its eyes, a loneliness that Lila understood. She couldn't explain it, but she felt the connection between them, as though the dragon and she were not so different after all. The hatchling let out a low growl, its sharp teeth glistening. It was warning her, but Lila was undeterred. She stood up slowly, her hands outstretched in front of her. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft and gentle. "I won't hurt you." The dragon's growl stopped, and for a moment the air was still. The creature watched her, its glowing eyes narrowing, studying her with a cautious curiosity. Lila took another step forward, her little feet crunching on the rocky ground. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. But she kept moving. Then, with a soft, almost playful look, she smiled brightly and said the words that would change everything. "You're charming." The dragon blinked at her in confusion. To the adults, a dragon was a fierce, deadly beast. It was something to be feared. But to Lila, it was just another creature that deserved kindness. She saw no threat in it, only a beautiful creature that needed a friend. The dragon's posture shifted. It no longer looked like it wanted to pounce. Instead, it tilted its head, confused by the strange human child who wasn't afraid. It took a tentative step toward her, its claws clicking softly on the rocks. Lila, still smiling, knelt down to be on the dragon's level. The hatchling sniffed at her hand with its hot, moist nose. A spark of heat shot from its nostrils, but Lila didn't flinch. She remained calm, letting the creature inspect her. "See? No need to be afraid," she whispered, holding her palm open for the dragon to sniff. "I'm your friend." The dragon hesitated, but then, to Lila's delight, it nudged her hand with its nose. The touch was warm, almost like the feeling of the sun on a summer day. Lila giggled, her excitement growing. "Charming," she said again, her voice full of certainty. "That's what I'll call you." At that, something incredible happened. The dragon's glowing eyes softened and the tension in its body relaxed. It lowered its head as if accepting Lila's presence, something it had not done for any of the other humans. The bond was instant, inexplicable, and undeniable. Lila knew in that moment that she wasn't just a little girl standing next to a dragon. She was its friend. The hatchling let out a quiet growl, but this time it wasn't menacing. It almost sounded like a purr. Lila's heart swelled with joy. "See? I knew you weren't so bad," she whispered, rubbing the dragon's warm scales gently. The dragon looked around, and for the first time in its short life, It didn't feel like an outsider. It didn't feel like a monster. It felt seen. Lila's voice broke the silence again. "Don't worry, Charming. I'll take care of you." Unknown to both the girl and the hatchling, the research team had begun to notice the dragon's strange behavior. At first, they thought the creature had been injured or was ill. But when they saw Lila standing next to it, calm and unafraid, they realized something else entirely. The dragon, normally a terrifying beast, had shown an unusual level of trust in the little girl. They watched from a distance, amazed and baffled by the scene unfolding before them. How had Lila managed to do something no one else had even dared to try? How had she tamed the wild creature with nothing but her innocence and her words? The team leader, Dr. Harper, stood silently, observing the bond between the girl and the hatchling. It was clear to her that something extraordinary was happening. "This changes everything," Dr. Harper whispered under her breath. But for Lila, it was simple. She had made a new friend, and she would never let anyone hurt Charming. This was only the beginning of a strange and wonderful journey. The days that followed the meeting between Lila and the dragon were nothing short of magical. As the sun rose each morning, Lila would sneak away from the camp, her small footsteps quiet against the rocky terrain of Zarathar. No one stopped her. The scientists had started to realize something about Lila that they could not quite understand. She had a special connection with the creatures on this strange planet, and the dragon was no exception. The hatchling, whom Lila had lovingly named Charming, was no longer the wild, fiery beast that the team had feared. Instead, he had become her constant companion, following her wherever she went. The once ferocious creature now looked at Lila with eyes full of trust, as though she had unlocked a part of him that no one else had ever seen. It was as if the bond between them had softened the dragon's heart. Lila would spend hours with Charming, talking to him as if he were any other friend. She wasn't afraid to approach him, even when his scales shimmered with heat and his tail whipped through the air with powerful force. She didn't need to be afraid because she knew Charming wasn't going to hurt her. Not anymore. The dragon seemed to understand her too. He would lower his head and nuzzle her hand when she reached out to him. He followed her everywhere, whether she explored the volcanic plains or played near the strange glowing plants. Whenever Lila would stop to rest, Charming would curl up beside her, his massive body forming a warm, protective circle around her. It was as if he had claimed her as his own, his instinct to protect her stronger than any urge to harm. The other members of the research team were in awe. At first, they had watched from a distance, unsure of how to react to the unexpected friendship that was forming between the girl and the dragon. But as the days passed, they began to understand. Lila's gentle voice and calm presence had done something no one else could do. She had bridged the gap between humanity and a creature that was as powerful as it was dangerous. Even Dr. Harper, the leader of the team, couldn't hide her amazement. She had been one of the first to label the dragon as a threat. She was the one who had insisted on setting up high-tech sensors around the camp to monitor the creature's movements. But now, watching the bond grow between Lila and Charming, Dr. Harper couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. How was this possible? How had a 6-year-old human child managed to tame the most dangerous creature on Zarathar? One afternoon, while the team was busy collecting data on nearby plant life, Lila and Charming ventured out beyond the camp. Lila was holding a small device in her hands, scanning the environment as she skipped along, her eyes darting between the rocky cliffs and the bubbling hot springs. Charming followed closely behind, his eyes ever watchful. Despite his size, he moved with surprising grace, his wings folded against his back. Lila was talking to him as she often did, though no one else could understand what she was saying. It was as if she spoke to him with a language that only the two of them shared. "Look, Charming," Lila said, pointing to a cluster of strange glowing mushrooms that grew at the base of a large stone. "These are different from the ones near the camp. I bet you could eat them if you wanted." Charming sniffed the mushrooms, and for a moment his glowing eyes flickered with uncertainty. Lila giggled. "I guess not," she said, pulling him away from the mushrooms. "Maybe something else later, okay?" Lila's joy was infectious. Even though Charming couldn't speak in words, Lila could read his body language, his eyes, and the gentle growls that rumbled in his throat. She was in tune with him in a way no one else could explain. To her, the dragon was just a creature in need of kindness and understanding, just like any other animal. And so she treated him as such, without fear, without hesitation. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Lila and Charming grew stronger. The other members of the research team began to take notice, especially Professor Thorne, the biologist who was fascinated by the behavior of the dragon. He had spent years studying alien species, but he had never seen anything like this. A human child had not only tamed a dragon, but had formed a connection with it that was deep and unexplainable. Professor Thorne observed the two of them closely, his mind racing with questions. He had always believed that intelligence and reason were the keys to understanding alien life. But what he was witnessing now was something far more profound. The relationship between Lila and Charming wasn't about science or logic. It was about something far simpler: trust. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the volcanoes, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lila sat on a large rock near the camp, her feet dangling over the edge. Charming lay beside her, his head resting on the ground, his wings partially unfurled. The two of them watched the stars begin to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Lila had always loved the stars. They reminded her of home, of Earth, of everything she had left behind to come to this strange new world. But tonight, as she sat next to Charming, she realized that she didn't feel lonely. She felt connected to this dragon, connected to Zarathar, and connected to something much bigger than herself. She wasn't alone. "Do you ever think about home, Charming?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. The dragon's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and for a moment it seemed as though he was thinking about her words. He let out a low, rumbling sound, and Lila smiled. "Yeah, me too. But this is pretty amazing, right?" She leaned against him, feeling his warmth through her clothes. Charming shifted slightly, wrapping his tail around her protectively. In that moment, Lila realized something important. It wasn't just the dragon that needed her. She needed him too. As the night settled around them, the two of them, human and dragon, sat together in peaceful silence. A bond forged not by force or fear, but by a simple, genuine connection. But this was only the beginning. Lila didn't know it yet, but the adventure they had started was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would change the course of both their lives forever. The peaceful days on Zarathar seemed endless. Lila and Charming had formed an unbreakable bond, and their adventures together had brought them closer than anyone could have imagined. The researchers, still unsure of how to explain the unique relationship between a little girl and a dragon, had begun to accept that something extraordinary was happening on this strange world. But not everyone was so understanding. The planet of Zarathar was a treasure trove of natural resources. While the planet's surface was rich with metals, rare minerals, and ancient energy sources, it was the core of the planet that truly interested the alien species known as the Pharaon. The Pharaon were a technologically advanced species who had long sought to control the planet's core energy, a powerful and dangerous source of heat and electricity that could be used to fuel their empire. For years, the Pharaon had tried to mine Zarathar's core, but their efforts had caused massive environmental damage, creating unstable conditions across the planet. The Pharaon knew that if they could harness the energy beneath the surface, they could rule not just Zarathar, but potentially entire star systems. The Pharaon had watched the humans from the shadows, carefully studying their every move. When they discovered that a human child had formed a bond with the planet's most powerful and dangerous creature, the dragon hatchling, they saw an opportunity. A group of Pharaon agents, experts in stealth and capture, were sent to infiltrate the human camp. They moved quietly through the volcanic landscape, using advanced cloaking technology to avoid detection. The Pharaon had no interest in killing Lila or the dragon. They simply wanted to take her. Their plan was simple. By capturing the girl who had tamed the dragon, they could force the creature to serve their needs. The Pharaon had studied the dragon's behavior, and they knew that as long as Lila was nearby, Charming would follow her every command. If they could separate the two, they could control the dragon's powerful abilities. The Pharaon waited for the perfect moment to strike. It was a late evening when the attack happened. The camp was quiet, with most of the research team gathered around a fire reviewing data from the day's exploration. Lila, as usual, was out with Charming, exploring a distant ridge near the edge of the camp. The two of them were sitting by a bubbling hot spring, with the dragon's fiery breath occasionally lighting up the sky as he playfully blew out streams of fire. Unbeknownst to Lila, the Pharaon agents had already slipped into the camp, carefully neutralizing the security system set up by the humans. They moved swiftly, their faces hidden by advanced helmets, their bodies cloaked by invisible armor. They crept into the research tents, disabling the camp's communication systems before snatching Lila from where she sat by the spring. The first sign that something was wrong came when Lila noticed the sudden absence of the dragon. She had been talking to Charming, laughing at one of his mischievous acts when the air grew cold. She looked around, puzzled. "Charming," Lila called softly. "Where are you?" She stood up, looking around in confusion. Normally, the dragon would be right by her side, but tonight something was different. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt a chill in the air, an unsettling feeling that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Before she could turn to head back to camp, the Ferron agents surrounded her. They moved so quickly that Lila barely had time to react. One of the agents grabbed her from behind, while another pressed a strange glowing device against her wrist, immobilizing her with a sharp jolt of energy. Lila gasped, struggling against the grip, but she couldn't break free. The Ferron spoke in a language she couldn't understand, their voices cold and mechanical. They didn't care about her fears or her cries. Their mission was clear: capture the girl. As Lila was pulled away, she screamed for Charming. "Charming, help me." But the dragon did not come. The Ferron agents quickly transported her into a concealed hovercraft, and they flew off into the night, leaving the quiet camp behind. It wasn't until they reached their hidden base that Lila was finally able to regain her senses. She was locked inside a cold, metallic cell with no windows and no way out. She sat on the floor, her heart racing, thinking about what had just happened. Why had Charming not come to her rescue? Was he too far away? Or had they somehow separated the two of them? Lila's mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything. She knew the dragon would never abandon her willingly, but it seemed as though something was wrong. The connection they shared had been so strong, so undeniable. Surely Charming would have come if he could. Back at the camp, the research team had begun to search for Lila when they realized she was missing. They called out her name, but no answer came. Dr. Harper and the others rushed into the volcanic landscape, scanning the area for any sign of her. But it was as though she had vanished. Then they saw the tracks, the marks in the sand where the hovercraft had landed and taken off. The trail led directly to the hidden Ferron base. It didn't take long for them to realize what had happened. The Ferron had taken Lila. Dr. Harper cursed under her breath. The team quickly formulated a plan to rescue the little girl, but they knew they couldn't do it alone. They needed Charming. Meanwhile, in the Ferron base, Lila sat in her cell trying to gather her courage. She was scared, yes, but she knew she couldn't give up. She had to find a way to get out. She had to get back to Charming. And just as she was beginning to lose hope, the ground shook. A deafening roar echoed through the base, shaking the walls. Lila's heart skipped a beat. It was Charming. With all the power of the dragon's fury, Charming had finally found her. The walls of the Ferron base trembled as Charming's roar echoed through the complex. Lila could hardly believe it. For a moment she sat frozen in her cell, unsure whether the sound was real or just a dream. But when the ground shook again, she knew the dragon was here. Her heart raced with both excitement and fear. Could Charming really break through the Ferron defenses? The Ferron were powerful and their base was heavily protected. But then again, Charming wasn't just any creature. He was a force of nature. Lila scrambled to her feet and rushed to the small window in her cell, her fingers pressing against the cold metal bars. She looked out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the dragon. In the distance, she saw it. Charming was coming, his glowing scales lighting up the dark sky as he flew through the air, wings beating with incredible strength. His fiery breath lit up the horizon and his roars grew louder as he approached the base. Lila felt a surge of hope flood through her chest. He was here. He had found her. Inside the Ferron base, chaos erupted. The Ferron agents, caught off guard by the dragon's sudden attack, scrambled to activate their defense systems. The massive blast doors that had been designed to keep out any threats were now rattling under the force of Charming's strikes. The alarms blared, flashing red lights across the cold, sterile hallways. Lila knew that if she didn't act quickly, the Ferron would tighten their security and trap Charming. The thought of being separated from him again was unbearable. She had to get out of her cell now. She turned to the small metallic console on the wall of her prison. It had been quiet and unhelpful when she had tried to interact with it earlier. But maybe now, maybe it could work. She ran over to the console, pressing buttons frantically, her fingers trembling with a mix of fear and hope. Come on, come on, Lila whispered to herself, her mind racing. She had no idea how to operate the Ferron technology, but she had to try. Suddenly, with a small beep, the console lit up. A green light flashed, and the thick door to her cell slid open with a heavy metallic sound. Lila gasped in surprise. She didn't know how it had happened, but she didn't have time to question it. Without hesitation, she bolted out of the cell and down the corridor, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, but she followed the sound of Charming's roars. She needed to reach him, to warn him. The last thing she wanted was for him to get caught by the Ferron's traps. As Lila ran through the hallways, she noticed more Ferron soldiers rushing past her, their weapons drawn and their faces grim. They had clearly underestimated the strength of the dragon, and now they were scrambling to defend their base. Lila ducked behind corners and moved quietly, hoping not to be seen. She couldn't afford to get caught again. Meanwhile, outside, Charming had reached the heart of the Ferron base. His powerful tail smashed through walls, his fiery breath lighting up the air as he fought against the Ferron's defenses. But the base was well protected, and Charming was starting to face resistance. He could feel the Ferron closing in, their weapons trying to target him from every direction. Still, the dragon was relentless. His mind was clear. He had to find Lila. She was in danger, and no force in the galaxy could stop him from getting to her. He roared again, a sound that seemed to shake the very earth beneath him, sending shockwaves through the Ferron base. His wings beat the air with such power that the buildings around him trembled. The Ferron had underestimated him, thinking he was just a creature to be captured and controlled. They had no idea what he was capable of. Inside the base, Lila turned a corner and found herself face to face with a group of Ferron agents. They looked at her in surprise, not expecting to see the little human girl on the loose. But Lila didn't hesitate. She had come too far and there was no turning back now. She grabbed a nearby metal rod from the ground, wielding it like a weapon. The Ferron stared at her, unsure of what to do. But just as they began to step forward, a deafening crash shook the hallway. The walls buckled and the lights flickered. The Ferron turned in panic, their attention momentarily distracted. That was all Lila needed. She dashed past them, her small frame moving quickly through the confusion. The Ferron shouted after her, but she was already too far ahead. Lila kept running, her only focus on reaching the central chamber, where she knew she would find Charming. Her heart was racing, but she kept her mind clear. She had to find him. She had to make sure he was safe. Outside, the battle was intensifying. Charming had broken through the base's outer defenses, but the Ferron weren't giving up easily. They unleashed their most powerful weapons, aiming at the dragon's massive form. But Charming was quick. He dodged the blasts and returned fire with streams of flame from his mouth, setting parts of the base ablaze. Finally, Lila reached the central chamber where she saw the dragon, standing strong in the middle of the chaos. His eyes locked onto hers as she entered the room, and the connection between them flared to life. "Charming," Lila shouted, her voice full of relief. The dragon turned toward her, a low rumble of recognition vibrating in his chest. He spread his wings wide and took a few powerful steps toward her. The Ferron agents who had been pursuing Lila stopped in their tracks, realizing that they were no match for the dragon. Lila quickly ran to Charming's side, placing a hand on his warm scales. "We need to go," she said urgently. "They're not going to stop. Let's get out of here." Charming looked down at her with understanding in his eyes. He crouched low, allowing Lila to climb onto his back. With a single powerful flap of his wings, he lifted off the ground, soaring into the sky with incredible speed. As they flew away from the Ferron base, the chaos below them became distant, fading into the background. Lila clung tightly to Charming, her heart still racing but now filled with a sense of relief. They had escaped. They were free. But Lila knew that the danger was far from over. The Ferron would not give up easily. They would keep coming after her and Charming, trying to control the dragon's power. The battle had only just begun. Still, as Lila looked down at the world below, she knew that together, they could face whatever came next. She and Charming were a team, and nothing would ever break the bond between them. The night sky stretched endlessly above, the stars twinkling like small promises of peace. Lila clung to Charming's back, the wind rushing past her, her hair flowing behind her like a banner in the breeze. The dragon's wings beat powerfully, each flap sending them higher into the sky, away from the chaos of the Farron base below. But even as they soared above the planet, Lila's mind raced. Though she had escaped, the danger was far from over. The Farron would never give up. They wanted control of the dragon's power, and they wouldn't rest until they had it. "Charming," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "We can't just run. We need to stop them. We need to make sure they don't hurt anyone else." The dragon let out a low, rumbling growl in response, as though understanding her words. He flapped his wings harder, climbing higher. Lila could feel the strength of his movements, and despite the fear lingering in her heart, she knew that together, they could face anything. They flew for hours across the rugged landscape of Zarathar. The volcanic mountains, once so intimidating, now seemed small from this height. Below, the lava rivers still glowed with an eerie light, casting reflections across the rocky terrain. But in the distance, a larger, more imposing structure stood tall. It was the Farron's main fortress, a sprawling complex built into the side of a mountain, a symbol of their power and control. Lila knew they had to go there. It was where the Farron had gathered their forces. If they could defeat the Farron in their own stronghold, they might end the threat once and for all. Charming's wings beat steadily as he flew closer to the fortress. The dragon's glowing eyes flickered with a hint of fire, and Lila could feel his determination. This was it. It was time to put an end to the Farron's plans. As they approached the fortress, Lila felt a strange calm wash over her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she knew exactly what needed to be done. She wasn't just some frightened child anymore. She had become the key to something much bigger than herself. With Charming at her side, she had the power to make a difference. "Let's do this," Lila said softly, her voice full of resolve. With a roar, Charming dove toward the fortress, his massive wings slicing through the air. The Farron had no idea they were coming. Alarms began blaring as the dragon approached, but it was too late. Charming was already on top of them. The fortress shook as the dragon landed, his claws scraping against the stone surface. The Farron soldiers scrambled in a panic, firing their weapons at the dragon, but they were no match for his strength. Charming let out another powerful roar, his breath setting parts of the fortress ablaze as he unleashed a stream of fire. Lila jumped off Charming's back, landing lightly on the ground. She could feel the heat from the flames, but she wasn't afraid. She knew what she had to do. "Stop," she shouted, her voice carrying across the chaos. "Stop fighting!" The Farron soldiers froze, their weapons still raised but unsure of what to do. Lila's voice, calm and steady, pierced through the panic. They weren't just dealing with a dragon. They were dealing with a human child who had tamed the most dangerous creature on the planet. The realization hit them hard. Lila took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising her hand as a sign of peace. "You don't have to do this. I know what you want, but hurting others won't help you. It'll only make things worse." For a long moment, the Farron soldiers didn't move. They were caught between fear and confusion, their orders conflicting with what they were seeing. The child, the dragon, they had never imagined that something like this would happen. But then, from within the fortress, a figure stepped forward. It was the leader of the Farron forces, a tall, imposing figure clad in black armor. His eyes glowed with a cold, calculating light, and he studied Lila with interest. "You've come to stop us, child?" The Farron leader's voice was like ice. "You think you can stop the power of the Farron?" Lila met his gaze. "I don't want to stop you. I want to help you. The planet Zarathar can be a place of peace for all of us. The energy, the power you seek, it's too dangerous. If we work together, we can find another way to harness it, a way that won't destroy this world." The Farron leader sneered. "You are naive. You have no idea what you're asking." Lila stepped forward again, this time her voice strong and unwavering. "I'm asking for the future, for all of us. The dragon, Charming, he's not a weapon. He's not a tool to be controlled. He's a symbol of what happens when we connect, when we understand each other. The only way forward is together, not through force." Charming let out a low growl, his head nodding in agreement. The leader of the Farron hesitated, his eyes flickering between Lila and the dragon. He could feel the weight of the moment, the decision that would change everything. For a long time, the only sound was the crackling of the flames and the distant roar of the volcanoes. Finally, the Farron leader lowered his weapon, his expression softening slightly. "You speak of peace," he said slowly, "but peace is difficult. We have spent centuries fighting for control, for power. Lila nodded. I know, but sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight inside ourselves. It's not about control. It's about trust. You can have power, but not at the expense of others. The Farron leader's gaze softened further, and for the first time, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He turned to his soldiers, who stood frozen in place watching the exchange. I think we may have been wrong, he said quietly. Perhaps there is a different way. The tension in the air slowly began to dissipate. Lila and the Farron leader exchanged one final look before he turned to his soldiers and gave a command. One by one, they lowered their weapons, signaling the end of the conflict. Lila smiled, her heart swelling with relief. Thank you, she whispered. Charming let out a soft purr, his glowing eyes softening as the chaos around them faded into calm. Together, they had done it. They had stopped the war. The Farron had agreed to work with the humans to find a peaceful way to harness the planet's power, and Lila and Charming's bond had shown them the true strength of cooperation. As Lila and Charming stood side by side, looking out over Zarathar, the stars above seemed brighter, as if they were witnessing the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of peace and unity. And in that moment, Lila knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she and Charming would face them together stronger than ever.